All right. Well, hi, everyone. Welcome back to the second annual International E-Conference on Atheism. My name is Dr. Darren Slade, and I'm the president of the Global Center for Religious Research, which is hosting this year's academic conference. Now, something to keep in mind is that GCRR is not interested in converting or deconverting anybody from their belief system. We are strictly an academic institution, and we seek to approach the discussion of God and suffering purely from a scholastic standpoint, whether that standpoint is theistic, atheistic, or something else entirely. Now, that's actually, in fact, one of the greatest things about GCRR is that you're being joined by students, scholars, and specialists from all over the world with a whole bunch of different backgrounds and traditions, right from the comfort and safety of your own home. And because each of these presentations are video recorded, the information presented here will be available to anyone who had purchased a ticket to the two-day event. And that's just our way of saying thank you for coming out and supporting us. Also, as a special gift to everybody, I will put a link in the Zoom box, but if you're not joining us via Zoom, all you have to do is go to gcrr.org, our website, and look up our newest publication called God and Horrendous Suffering. And with that, all you have to do is scroll down to the bottom, and you can download a special sneak preview of the book by clicking the preview button. And if you end up wanting to purchase that book, we do recommend that you go through the GCRR website because our prices are a lot lower. But also, we're going to give you 15% off more than on the retail price. All you have to do is use the promo code SUFFERING, and that's all in lowercase. Use the promo code SUFFERING at checkout. And I'll also put that information in the chat box as well. And one last thing you might want to know is that the Global Center for Religious Research has established the most comprehensive international research group to study the causes, manifestations, and treatment options for those suffering from religious trauma. But we have a big problem. See, in order for victims of religious trauma to receive help, we need to arrive at a place in our culture where religious trauma is recognized as a real mental health condition. And unfortunately, the academic study of religious trauma is still in its infancy. This means that there are no exhaustive empirical studies to support what we have seen and experienced, that religious trauma exists and is a chronic problem. As it stands, really only anecdotal case studies have been published so far, but nothing substantially empirical. And GCRR wants to correct this gap of knowledge, and we're hoping to get your help with that. So we have set up a GoFundMe page in order to crowdsource the world's very first, most comprehensive sociological study on the existence, causes, and manifestations of religious trauma. Now, the reason we are crowdsourcing this stuff is because we were actually set to get a grant, federal grant for this research project, and then the federal government halted all funding for mental health research. So we were left holding the bag. That's why we're hoping the public can join us in this effort. All you have to do is go to GoFundMe.com and search for the phrase religious trauma sociological study, or you can click the link that I'm going to put in the chat box. And at the very least, please share this GoFundMe page across all your social media platforms just to get the word out about this really important research project. With that said, I would like to introduce to you my very good friend and our next presenter, Mark Gura. Allow me to share my screen to give a proper introduction. Now, Mark's presentation today is entitled Testing the Buddha. Mr. Gura is an author and speaker. He is president of Atheist Alliance of America. He's the former host of the Richard Dawkins Award, former secretary of the Atheist Republic, and he's the president of the Association of Mindfulness, Meditation, and Secular Buddhism. We are so privileged to have you here. So thank you so much for doing this. Mark, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you so much, Darren. It's such an honor and a pleasure to be here. Should I start?
Yes, please, go for it.
All right. Okay, so it's so great to be here with you all. And we're going to be talking about really the most important, I think, topic in existence, our happiness and thus suffering, the other end of that. the other end that challenges our happiness. And just some quick housekeeping items. I'm going to be simplifying Buddhism to its essential core from a meditator's perspective. And when referring to traditional Buddhism, I'll be referring to Theravada Buddhism. And the citations are in the text herein mostly, but full citations are in the book. So what I want to start with is just to kind of understand who the Buddha was from an atheist perspective, from a secular perspective, from a human perspective, and what was he trying to achieve, if the Buddha actually existed at all. And really, if you think about it, what Buddhism was created to deal with suffering. Siddhartha Gautama, and by the way, the title, the Buddha, loosely means enlightened person. So that title came later, but he was born as a prince or a chieftain's son. Most people know this story. I'll just go through it really quickly. But he became disenchanted with his life, with his privileged life, with the material things that he had an abundance of, and the worldly attainments that he was expected to accomplish. And he was overwhelmed by thoughts of the suffering that occurs in the world, and the suffering that he learned about, and the suffering that he knew would eventually perhaps hit him as well. So he renounced his kingdom, his inheritance. He became an ascetic. He traveled around his known world, studying all forms of the religions that were available during his day, and he practiced all the different forms of meditation, coming to the conclusion that suffering could probably be eradicated through meditation, through internal means, through psychological means, more so than through external means. And that kind of makes sense because, we can't control our world. No matter what we gain in the world, we're going to wind up, those things are going to be challenged eventually by time or by circumstances. And so often it's more about how we deal with our trials and our tribulations, especially in our own mind, in our own brain, than really how we organize our external world. And that's the conclusion, I think, that the Buddha came to. And so this great renunciation story, which I just referred to, roughly 2,600, 2,500 years ago. So old, before Christianity was on the scene, before Islam was on the scene, the Buddha was trying to eradicate suffering psychologically. And his claim to fame is that he supposedly discovered meditation techniques that eradicate suffering. And these meditation techniques are supposed to show results in everyday life, here and now, and not just after death, not just in some enlightened plane after we die. And so Buddhism unfolds the Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths, which kind of summarize the path, help a person get on the path. But really the path, nirvana itself in the Buddhist sense, nibbana, if you want to use the Pali term, it's all about cessation of suffering. And it's about cessation of suffering here and now as well. So really what Buddhism is claiming is that if you meditate properly, if you learn how to meditate properly in the Buddhist way, and usually it's said right up front that it's going to take years, many years, maybe lifetimes, and you do it on your own without the aid of drugs or machines, stuff like that. It's very important to be able to do it on one's own, because anything that's used externally to foster this state of mind is not your own unless it comes from within. So if you do it properly on your own, the promise is your suffering, your psychological suffering, will be lessened, and then it'll eventually go away, and then after death, even more so. And that's what traditional Buddhism says, the after death part. So the premise here is that you can teach your brain to be satisfied with reality with each moment. You can eradicate the craving that you have for alternate realities, because that's really what causes your suffering. And so no craving equals no suffering. And that's why you'll hear a lot about craving when you talk to Buddhists or when you read Buddhist texts. So Buddhism's fundamental core claim is that meditation can lead to the cessation of suffering. And our question is, can it? Buddhist scriptures advocate that the cessation of suffering and happiness are psychological phenomenon. And, so obviously, we're talking about some sort of psychology here. So being the skeptics that we are at the Atheist Alliance of America, at the Association of Mindfulness Meditation, and secular Buddhism, I'll tell you about secular Buddhism in a second, we're all about, testing claims, right? So testing the Buddha. So our goal is to gather interest and inform about a peer-reviewed study that we're going to be conducting. And this is going to be the first study where a major religion is either confirmed or falsified based on its own claims in a science lab. And, studies have been done already about the health aspects of meditation and Buddhist meditation and the stress release aspects of meditation. But we're conducting a study that ethically, scientifically, replicably, in a peer-reviewed way, will test whether enlightened people, if we can find any, have achieved cessation of suffering. And enlightenment, there are several stages of enlightenment, so we don't have to find a full-blown Buddha that flies through the sky. So compared to other religions, other major religions, Buddhism is the most testable for several reasons that I'll mention. Because Buddhism doesn't, and I'm saying traditional Buddhism of the Theravada earliest Buddhism, does not credit the Buddha with creating the world or having the power to stop suffering, unwanted things. The Buddha is not considered a creator God with a capital G, unlike the other major religions. And therefore, the Buddha is not really, according to the scripture, the Buddhist scriptures, responsible for suffering in the world. Quite the contrary, we are responsible for our own suffering in the world, according to Buddhism, because how we organize our own brain is how our own suffering manifests itself for us. So the Buddha doesn't make any claims to be a god. I know later some Buddhists have made a god out of the Buddha. That was not, according to everything I've ever read, early Buddhism, that was never the intention. Basically, the Buddha was just a guy who suffered or who knew he would suffer, and he learned how not to suffer. And then for the rest of his life, he spent teaching other people how not to suffer. So the claim is that, after extensive year-long regimens of meditation, you transform your psyche, and this causes enlightenment or non-suffering for anybody who is able to practice correctly, and not everybody will be able to practice correctly. So there's no promise that everybody can achieve enlightenment in Theravada and early Buddhism. Meditation gives Buddhism a unique position amongst religions, and specifically Buddhist meditation, because really it's the only major religion that makes a claim, a core claim, that can be measured, tested, falsified, or confirmed. The other major religions promote the idea that gods exist, that they can provide ultimate happiness, that they can provide ultimate non-suffering. Buddhism scoffs at that, saying, well, if a god can provide happiness for you, then you are a robot. You don't have free will because something else externally to you is controlling your brain or your psyche or your essence or whatever you want to call it. And the other thing is, so Buddhism kind of runs contrarian to the other major religions. And Buddhism also warns its practitioners that finding external means of happiness lead to suffering, and that includes worshiping gods. So as you can imagine, Buddhism made quite a stir when it showed up in ancient times in Hindu societies, where the name of the game was to worship gods. And Buddhism said, don't worship gods, because worshiping gods actually will create suffering for you, because you're going to be attached to something external that you have no control over. And that external agent is going to basically mess with your happiness, because your happiness is going to be in their hands. Don't worship gods, learn how to meditate, you'll stop suffering. So Buddhism was all about eradicating stress and suffering internally. And, let's face it, if we tried to do this study for Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, we'd run into some problems, because the other major religions put forth claims, and their essential core claims are not very testable. How are you going to test if Jesus rose from the dead in a laboratory? Because that's really the essence of Christianity. If Jesus rose from the dead, Christianity is true, but Christianity doesn't have any verifiable evidence for that. Hearsay is not verifiable evidence, and we can't test that in the laboratory. Islam, saying that the Prophet Muhammad spoke with God, how are you going to test that today in a laboratory? Judaism's claim that God exists, untestable. Hinduism's claim that multiple gods exist, untestable. Buddhism's claim that Buddhist meditation can eradicate unnecessary suffering, testable in a laboratory. So Buddhism is not, and what I want to do is kind of give you an outline of truly, simply at its essence, what Buddhism truly is, because it's the concept's gotten so mucked around, because there's so many different perspectives on it, that, unless you study it for years, especially as a meditator, it's very difficult to truly understand it. But Buddhism is not theism. As mentioned, the Buddha never wanted anyone, according to the earliest scriptures, to worship gods. And he didn't claim to be a god that needed to be worshiped. And this is right in the scriptures, and oftentimes it's hidden. But one of the first statements that he supposedly made, according to the scriptures, after he became enlightened, and I'm paraphrasing here, but you can see it on the screen, is that he had been searching for the creator of, what created him, the Buddha, what, as a man searching to find the answer to how not to suffer. He'd been searching all his life for who created him. And what he found out is that he created himself. His mind creates his essence, his existence. And he finally, now knowing that no one else outside of him created him, has found the answer. So this is a very atheistic thing to say in a very Hindu society, that he was born to try to protect, according to his family, his ancestors, who wanted him to further the family religion. But the Buddha basically went against all that and said, the ridgepole's shattered, the rafters are broken. I've figured out, what it's all about, and it's not about gods. It's not about God. And of course, the world at the time believed in gods, but also rebirth and reincarnation. And we'll talk about rebirth and reincarnation in a second. So the Buddha did make it clear, though, that he didn't think faith in reincarnation or rebirth was required. And reincarnation and rebirth are two different concepts, too much to get into right now. So let's just say that to simplify things for now. But the main claim of Buddhism is that the Buddhist techniques eradicate suffering in this life, and then that carries forth into future lives, if such things even exist, because there are various forms of Buddhism, we'll talk about them in a second, where rebirth, belief and faith in rebirth is not necessary. So this is quite a departure, what the Buddha brought forth to the world from everything else that existed at the time. And we tend to misunderstand Buddhism because we tend to, or the people in the West people theists in the West tend to look at Buddhism from a theist lens. They tend to kind of say, oh, you're praying to the Buddha. It's a God, he's saving humans. That's a very theist lens, which is totally, it's incorrect. It's incorrect for what was meant, for what the Buddha meant. Because the Buddha credits his enlightenment to his mind, not to God's. And he basically gives the promise that it's not gods that are going to save you. It's your own work in learning how to meditate that's going to destroy your cravings and it's going to help you attain cessation of suffering. So he's proposing a psychological, a meditation type solution. So the question is so often asked, well then is Buddhism a religion? And I define religion as any system of beliefs concerning the cause, nature, and purpose of the universe, whose core concepts refer to the supernatural. And so there are two types of Buddhism, really. Traditional Buddhism, and traditional Buddhism does refer to the supernatural, to rebirth, to gods with a small g, which really are spirits, but they've been kind of theized by our Western culture. And so I think traditional Buddhism is a religion. I think it fits that definition. And but I think secular Buddhism is a philosophy. So both answers are correct depending on how you're practicing Buddhism. And so some people are shocked when Buddhism is given that label of religion, but I think I think that definition where the supernatural is an element of, if the supernatural is an element of a philosophy, and that's what makes something a religion, I think is very important, because otherwise football and science even and all kinds of things could be considered a religion, and that's totally ridiculous. I don't think the idea that something is practiced fervently should qualify it as being a religion. I think fervent practice with a mixture of supernaturalistic faith is a good core cornerstone of a definition that should meet what a religion is. But what I really want to emphasize is that Buddhism's paranormal claims, Buddhism's supernatural claims, even amongst traditional Buddhists, are not the most important thing, or almost inconsequential to enlightenment. And I'll talk about that more in a second, but it's really all about cessating suffering. And so secular Buddhism utilizes Buddhist culture, Buddhist ethics, philosophy, and meditation techniques without referring to the paranormal or to supernatural claims. Secular Buddhists only believe claims that are confirmed by the best science available. They don't support gurus or believe in gods or rebirth or anything supernatural. Whereas traditional Buddhists do embrace those traditional beliefs. But both traditional and secular Buddhists, I think, agree that the ones who truly know the religion and who've practiced meditation truly know that really meditation is the key to Buddhism. In the scriptures, the Malankupataya tells the Buddha that he would not devote his life to meditation until the Buddha declared what happened to the soul and if the cosmos was infinite. So here was this guy, Malankupataya, and he meets the Buddha and he says, look, I'm not gonna practice what you're teaching until you tell me what happens after death. And the Buddha says to him what's now called the parable of the poisoned arrow. Look, if you were shot by an arrow, you wouldn't care, and you were suffering, you wouldn't care who shot you in the moment. You just want to live. You just want the arrow gone, especially if the arrow was smeared with poison. You'd just want to you'd want to be saved from the arrow. You wouldn't care who shot you, how they shot you, what bow they were using. So I'm not going to get into afterlife beliefs with you. Afterlife beliefs are of no consequence to enlightenment. What's most important about enlightenment is your work in meditating correctly. And really that's the core essence of Buddhism is meditate correctly and learn how not to suffer. So this is mirrored in other places in the scripture as well. So really the huge takeaway here is there's two forms of Buddhism really. There's the traditional Buddhism that uses the methods that refer to the supernatural, that believes in reincarnation, deities, and so on and so forth, and secular Buddhism that requires no supernaturalism. And with secular Buddhism, a Buddhist can practice the ethics of Buddhism or the meditation or the philosophy, but they don't have to believe in supernatural stuff. So what does Buddhism say about eradication of suffering in reference to reincarnation and rebirth and stuff like that? And why is that not important to Buddhism really? It's because the Buddhism stresses that suffering as a psychological phenomenon is what it's all about, and it stresses that human stress is self-created. It can be eradicated through proper rewiring of our neuroscience, and so secular Buddhists don't require that extra element of rebirth. And for example, when karma is mentioned, karma is a Sanskrit term that means action or doing, and the whole idea is that from moment to moment we're doing something within our own brain. We're creating mental and habits that turn into physical habits that become a part of us, that become patterns that shape who we are, that the world then reacts to. And so really this word karma really means character or personality. And for traditional Buddhists, this personality, this character continues into future lives. But for secular Buddhists, it doesn't, because secular Buddhists don't believe in future lives. But what both types of Buddhists agree to is that one's character is formed by one's mental actions and is forever changing. So Buddhism doesn't believe in any kind of an eternal soul or anything like that. And that's the case for traditional Buddhism as well. Even though traditional Buddhism believes that some sort of character survives after death and basically creates a new body around itself. Not that it actually enters a new body. That's another mischaracterization that people don't understand about Buddhism often. So in traditional Buddhism, a being is reborn because of its former character and continuously shapes his or her or their brain, and becomes this continuously becomes a new persona, and that continues, not because some god or some force in the sky keeps some ledger in the sense of, you did something bad and I'm going to write this down now because you have bad karma now. Think of karma in the Buddhist sense as a form of a character, as your character, as your personality. So these character traits, continue in traditional Buddhism into future lives. In secular Buddhism, they don't. But secular Buddhism describes this as neuropathways that we're continuously producing. So if we're producing neuropathways that cause stress and suffering, we will continue to produce stress and suffering. If we continue, a traditional Buddhist might say, if you develop a neuropathways that where suicide is an option, or homicide is an option, or depression is an option, then it's going to be a lot easier for you in future lifetimes to when you're born to embrace what you've done in the past. So traditional Buddhism believes that future bodies are formed because of our past habits, and they do believe that people are born in the future as animals, but not because of punishment, but because if one doesn't have the needs of a human and the needs of an animal are satisfactory, then it doesn't matter, you don't really need to be born as a human because you don't really have those needs of a human. So it's all about the character that you're building, the intentions that you're building, what you're manifesting, but not in any kind of wooey or spooky way when it comes to secular Buddhism, but just, from a day-to-day kind of existence. And a non-human birth is considered to be a disadvantage because the Buddha said, or the scriptures say, that animals do not know how to, or cannot meditate using Buddhist meditation in the same way that humans can. So it's considered favorable to be human and to be able to utilize Buddhist meditation to break that cycle of birth and death in the traditional Buddhist sense, and not be reborn as a suffering being. So there are supernatural references in Buddhist scriptures, but secular Buddhists kind of take the Thomas Jefferson Bible approach and do not believe in anything that cannot be confirmed by evaluation, by falsification, by science. So traditional Buddhists do. So, for example, traditional Buddhists believe that the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, attained at least 17 supernatural powers after enlightenment. But traditional Buddhists agree that those supernatural superpowers are irrelevant to non-suffering. They're irrelevant to enlightenment. That was just something extra that this particular Buddha was able to attain. And you see some of the superpowers here, like levitating and foretelling the future and taming wild animals and regrowing flesh on the person's, but just ridiculous stuff, or that a skeptic might say is just ridiculous. But traditional Buddhists do believe that kind of stuff. Secular Buddhists don't. The Buddha did rebuke non-Buddhists and Buddhists alike, and even enlightened Buddhists of his day, because it was acknowledged that some of his students became enlightened during his lifetime. He rebuked them for using their superpowers, which meditation is supposed to give you if you practice properly and long enough. But once again, the emphasis here is that it's very much stressed within Buddhist scriptures that supernatural powers, the supernatural things like that, are not necessary for enlightenment. So Buddhism can very easily do without all of that supernatural stuff, without going against the essence of what the scriptures say. And there are parables that can be highlighted that mention that and show that throughout the scriptures, that confirm this, what I'm saying. End all be all, meditation's considered the greatest good, period. The Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, those are guides. The ultimate act of empathy and compassion is to help some other person learn how to meditate and cease their suffering. And so a lot of the scriptures, I kind of see the scriptures as a kind of manual for how to meditate properly and how to cultivate the brain and the neuroscience and the mind that you've cultivated because of the great work that you've done, meditation wise. So the meditation is supposed to change the brain. It's supposed to make it no longer crave, so that you don't suffer anymore. And then there are certain milestones on the path that show that you're going in the right direction. So being able to have goodwill and honesty and ethics and wisdom and renunciation and generosity, diligence, patience, determination, equanimity, all of these things are markers on the road that show that you're attaining enlightenment, you're attaining cessation of suffering. It's not so much that you're an ethical person and that alone is going to make you enlightened, or you're an honest person, or you're equanimous or an empathetic person, and that's going to make you enlightened. Quite the contrary, these things have nothing to do with enlightenment, because enlightenment really at its essence is non-suffering, is the ability not to suffer unnecessarily, seen from a secular Buddhist perspective. And from a traditional Buddhist perspective, it's not suffering in its entirety. So also, according to the scriptures, there are several stages of enlightenment, several stages before you become enlightened. And one of the first things that happens is you no longer become attached to ideas of an unchanging soul or self. You no longer are attached to rites and rituals. You don't worship gods. You don't doubt the teachings. And by the teach, you don't doubt the meditation. Really, that's what it really is supposed to be. Once you get to that point where meditation is just a part of you, and it's never going away, and you use it as a tool, you're on your way. And then once you get to the second stage, you overcome the need for sensual desires and ill will, and when you get to that stage and you're a once returner, this is according to traditional Buddhism, there's only one rebirth left, one life left. And of course, Mahayana Buddhism changed all of that and looks at it totally differently, and feels that a true Buddha, a true enlightened person wouldn't just save himself or herself themselves. They would stay until everyone's saved. And of course, Theravada vehemently disagrees with that. But in the third stage, a non-returner is a person that's said to have completely freed themselves from sensual desire and ill will, is not coming back, is not going to be reborn again. And then the fourth stage of enlightenment, which in the scriptures, there are many people who attained this during the Buddha's lifetime, and they ceased suffering. And that's the key. They ceased suffering in life. And then because they were able to cease suffering in life, this carries over, that character, that karma that they built, that brain, that essence that they built, that non-suffering essence continues into the afterlife. And a person is rid of all their, restlessness, their ignorance, in the sense that they think ignorant to the idea that they require something other than just this beautiful moment, not realizing that this moment is enough, and this moment is bliss, and bliss in the satisfaction sense. So non-suffering is really satisfaction. It's the ability to be able to sit in a room for a millennia, for 2 years, for a year, and be satisfied with the moment. And even, if you were locked in a coffin covered by earth, but you were still alive and you were dying, and your water was limited, your air was limited, your food was limited, you're laying there, an enlightened person would be able to theoretically be fine with that moment until they died. And then, traditional Buddhism says, well, then that person is no longer reborn, but exists. Maybe it's kind of faint. Buddhism makes it a little bit faint as to what existence after death really is. The Buddha tried not to speak about that anytime he could. And secular Buddhism doesn't believe in an afterlife. So, but the moments before death are moments of satisfaction rather than suffering and a hell-like state of trying to claw your way out. I mean, that person, I'm not saying that person is a vegetable who would just say, kill me, I'm just a vegetable, I'm just satisfied with being dead. I mean, that person, I think, would use strength and vigor and everything possible to try to escape that fate, because they'd want to live and they'd want to do good things in the world and stuff like that, not out of a sense of craving or attachment, but out of a sense of, maybe goodwill and wanting to help people, or, whatever their mission, their self-created mission is, right? But obviously, different types of Buddhism look at these things differently. But the essence is that satisfaction, learning how to be one with the moment. But the takeaway, the huge takeaway, is there is no God here that's rescuing anyone. There's no Buddha that's rescuing any. The Buddha is an example to people, and but not a rescuer. That's not the initial Buddhism. That's what it was all about. The Buddha is an example. Reaching enlightenment is up to the meditator, and the Buddha warned so much, against dogmatism, against blind faith, against faith in external sources. And I think these things have been abused over the centuries afterwards. So really the way the Buddhist enlightenment cycle is supposed to work, especially in traditional Buddhism, is meditation teaches a person to stop craving, to be satisfied with the moment, to not suffer. Secular Buddhism tones it down a little bit and says, yeah, we're not really sure if total suffering, non-suffering is possible, but unnecessary suffering is definitely possible. Whereas traditional Buddhism kind of says, suffering. And then once a person stops that craving, that attachment, that character, that karma that causes suffering, and they die, and they practice ceaselessly, and then that second, according to traditional Buddhism, that cycle of birth and death stops, and then that person no longer suffers in the afterlife. So the assumptions continue. If suffering can cease for humans, will it eventually cease for all beings? As all beings will eventually be born human, according to traditional Buddhism, maybe. So that's a question that kind of, isn't really explained. And so Mahayana and Theravada take different stances on it, somewhat. But maybe if you want to kind of play the devil's advocate and say, well, why do more births happen and stuff like that? Well, maybe it's possible that it's because of other worlds, stuff like that. But anyway, that's getting off on a tangent. That's more of a traditional Buddhist argument. So, but it's pretty clear according to the scriptures that one needs to be born human in order to achieve enlightenment, because the God, and that's another interesting thing that traditional Buddhism says about gods, is they say that gods are not enlightened beings, that they still crave to be worshipped. They need their followers, their worshipers, and they're suffering if they don't have that infusion of worship. So they're just pitiful beings. They're below the Buddha, and the Buddha is the teacher of gods and men. So that's an interesting twist that Buddhism kind of unfolded onto Hinduism, and I think by extension unfolds onto Christianity and in Islam as well. So meditation is the purest practice of Buddhism, but there is no verifiable evidence right now that meditation not only affects the afterlife, but actually works like it's promised. So this is why we're talking about this study. And I'll talk about that in a second. When it comes to supernaturalism, there's a big question of, why, in some parts of the scriptures, the Buddha didn't want to talk about rebirth and told his followers that rebirth, belief in rebirth, faith in reincarnation, things like that was not important. But at other times, Buddhism fully competed with the religions, the competing religions of the day, mainly Hinduism, and offered all the answers to people who may have not switched to Buddhism, converted to Buddhism if they hadn't. So maybe some of these supernatural elements exist in Buddhism because they had to, because people were and are impressed by magic and supernaturalism and stuff like that. Because the question can be asked, well, why are these things in the scriptures if the essence of Buddhism really is how to learn how to not suffer through meditation? And maybe it's because these things needed to be there because people who didn't really want to meditate or understand meditation, maybe they needed those magical components. But anyway, I'm just speculating here. So, I mean, Buddhism did exist 2,500 years ago, on the Indian subcontinent, where mythology and these beliefs were very important to people, and probably still are, not just there, but everywhere to people, to some people, right? Because many critics of Buddhism in the West are only familiar with theist religions, they tend to very much theize and try to make Buddhism into a very theistic type of religion, and it's really not. So really, I think a peer-reviewed study would do a lot to help clear up if the Buddhist core concept is actually if it's actually true, if it's actually working. And I think Buddhists, especially meditators who spend so many years learning to meditate, and they get personal benefit out of it, but I think meditators and Buddhists would want to know if they're wasting their time trying to learn something that is never really going to give them cessation of suffering, especially meditators in the beginning. So I think there's a demand for this study that we're about to put on, and obviously skeptics would want to know if this core claim that Buddhism promises is solid. And so I'm very happy to announce that that we are working to further this study. But I just want to highlight once again that supernaturalism in Buddhism is not really the core point of Buddhism, and that's why we don't really need to be testing the supernatural elements of Buddhism, because if the essential element that Buddhism claims to be able to deliver, that Buddhist meditation ceases suffering, if that is missing, then the supernatural elements of Buddhism fall apart also, and Buddhism just becomes Hinduism. And because that's really the difference between Buddhism and Hinduism, is Hinduism uses gods as the claim that Hindu gods will somehow help a person. Being one with the gods will somehow make a person enlightened. Whereas Buddhism makes the claim that it's your own work, you changing your brain, your essence, your character, your karma is what's going to produce enlightenment. And so the veneration that we see of the Buddha is not what was intentionally recommended. It was supposed to be, veneration was supposed to be more, it wasn't supposed to be worship. It was supposed to be more of a showing respect type of thing. So people practice Buddhism generally in 3 different ways today. You have advanced meditators, nominal meditators, and non-meditators. So advanced meditators regularly utilize advanced Buddhist meditation techniques to work on themselves, either become more enlightened or more stress-free, or the other benefits that meditation gives them. And my argument is that these are the people that are truly practicing, what the Buddha practiced, and they're following in those footsteps. And then you have nominal meditators who meditate every once in a while in mild ways. They might practice some of the other rites and rituals. And same with advanced meditators, of course, such as the Buddhist ethics or philosophy or rites or rituals. But really, meditation is not their core practice. Their core practice might be something else Buddhist. And some of them, may not even self-identify as Buddhists, but they practice Buddhist meditation. And so there's some argument to say that if someone does, then they're a Buddhist just by following what the Buddha, doing the same thing the Buddha did, right? But the interesting thing is in the scriptures, the Buddha was very critical of people who didn't meditate. He called people who didn't meditate uneducated. I mean, this might be something that you might hear from a professor who values whatever subject they know, and anyone who doesn't know that subject is uneducated, you know. And it's humorous a little bit, and you know, maybe a little bit sad, but the Buddha just felt that if someone didn't know how to meditate, they were they were not exercising the most important thing that a human could exercise, which is the cessation of suffering, and because only that could produce it. Because the Buddha strongly felt that external that practices could never bring you peace, that they're always going to bring some sort of stress, because they're going to change on you, they're going to go away, they're going to, if your happiness is based on something external that's not in your hands, you're doing a disservice to yourself. And so meditation is just such a better way to go. And you know, this, so he wasn't trying to insult people when he said that. He just didn't think it was good for a person to not meditate. And almost anyone can meditate for 15 minutes, calm the brain, release stress. And short meditation periods were considered by the early Buddhists, and are considered by advanced meditators as just initial steps, transitional steps, initial induction phases of trance state. They're not the kind of meditation that the scriptures claim will cause enlightenment. And one of the things that I'm criticized for in my books about meditation is, you know, why didn't you, you know, describe meditation and teach me how to meditate in your books? It's because that's not how you learn to meditate. You don't learn to meditate from books or videos or online courses. You go to long, extensive courses to properly learn how to meditate. And I truly, you know, having meditated for more than 20 years now, I truly believe that that's important. But there are tons and tons of Buddhists who do not meditate at all. And they call themselves Buddhist, and they self-identify as Buddhist, and that's okay. The Buddha kind of tended to look at that as anyone who supports the monks and the meditators is doing a good job for the world, for Buddhism. So I don't think the Buddha really cared very much about rites and rituals. The ethics were important and the philosophy was important, but only to the extent where it would empower you to cease suffering and to learn to meditate and to practice meditation. Now, there are more than 500 million Buddhists, according to some of the latest studies. Buddha Weekly says 1.6 million Buddhists in the world, because China is reclaiming Buddhism. I don't know if that's correct, but if it is, that would make Buddhism the second largest religion. Maybe it's a stretch, I don't know, but there are a lot of Buddhists who don't meditate. And some Buddhists who delve even into theism, which the Buddha recommended that we don't do, and condemned. Because attachment to externals, to gods or concepts of gods, the Buddha felt led to suffering. And his whole thing was about eradicating suffering. So the reason I think a lot of people don't meditate, you know, the obvious reason is we lack time, and you know, and so on and so forth. But anyone who actually starts to meditate realizes very quickly that meditation is one of the most difficult things that you can take on in life. And I'll speak to that in a little bit. And you know, for many centuries in Asian countries, meditation wasn't always available to everyone. Some orders of monks required you to be a monastic before you could learn how to meditate. One of the few loosenings of this in the Asian world happened in the 60s, when S.N. Goenka and his teachers started meditation centers for lay people, and kind of opened it up to lay people, because before that in their cultures, it wasn't really something that lay people did. That lay people were expected to support the monks, the meditators. And I think this has transformed the world. I remember when I studied with Goenka in the 90s, the word mindfulness was just, I mean, the whole concept of mindfulness was just not available in the world. And I just never thought that the world would embrace meditation ever. And later to find out that mindfulness has gotten so popular and that meditation has gotten so popular, it just blows my mind, because I never expected that. The interesting thing is that there are Buddhist practitioners who are monastics and who are scholars and philosophers and even lay educators and ethicists and philosophers who don't meditate. And the interesting thing about that is they're often considered, these crafts, these people are often considered the foremost experts on Buddhism, even though they don't practice the very essence of what the Buddha said was Buddhist practice. And that skews a lot of the outlooks on Buddhism too. So I want to talk about Buddhist meditation versus non-Buddhist meditation for a second. All major religions employ some form of trance state. When you're sitting in church or in a mosque and you're chanting or you're praying, your brain goes into that state of altered consciousness. That's a form of meditation. The difference is most other religions do not have within those techniques, the concept that something external causes suffering. So they're teaching you how to love and how to depend on external agents for your happiness while you're meditating, praying, chanting. And that programs your brain, according to Buddhism, to suffer more. The big difference between Buddhist meditation and all other meditations that don't have this concept of attachment equals suffering is that within their meditation techniques, those meditation techniques cause you to suffer more because of that. And I think the way that meditation works is it works through the idea of neuroplasticity. It's helping you change your neural pathways. So it is programming you to do something. My observation is that theist meditation helps program you to believe in theism more. That's what it's designed to do. Different meditations are designed to do different things. As we know, Buddhist meditation is designed to teach you how not to suffer by not attaching to things, external things. Theist meditation is designed to make you believe in theism more so you become a better theist. But the stated objective is that you're learning how to, or you're trying to commune with God or gods or whatever other external forces. The brain's neuroplasticity has a dark side, because if we're not exercising a certain type of meditation regimen, or if we don't know how to screen the influences that affect our neural pathways, that program us, that indoctrinate us, then we are being programmed. And Buddhist meditation is very good about teaching you how not to be programmed by external sources, because it's trying to teach you how not to be attached to external sources. So the difference is, in summary, between Buddhist meditation and non-Buddhist meditation, if you really had to go to the very essence, core root of it all, is that Buddhist meditation is teaching you how to be happy from within without needing external sources of happiness. Whereas all the other meditation techniques, unless they're aware of that and want you to achieve that goal, use external sources, which Buddhism thinks is causing you to suffer more. And this is why Buddhism's most significant deliverable is meditation. I mean, if a catastrophe happened right now and the world was ending and Buddhism could only preserve one thing, I'm sure some of you might think, well, it probably preserved the statues or the books, the knowledge, the rituals. But I think Buddhists who truly understand Buddhism would preserve the meditation. And this is why it's so beautiful that we're able to test the meditation in a laboratory and either falsify it or not, either prove it true or not, and we have this ability. And Buddhist meditation is pretty simple. I mean, it's concentrating on the breath, it's observing sensations of the body, but that's still a very powerful claim to be a very powerful tool. And yes, anyone can meditate. We can meditate by walking, taking a walk, pondering the universe, listening to music, watching TV, running, scuba diving. But if during your meditation, and I'm not going to call those things meditation, because the difference is true meditation is when you're seeking to accomplish some sort of objective, whereas just trance state is when meditation happens to you spontaneously. So when you're looking at the night sky and you go into that trance state, that's meditation, but it's really trance state. It's not, something's just happening to you and something external is affecting you without your permission, usually. So it's good because it relieves stress a little bit, but it's not teaching you how to be internally empowered. Rather than in many cases, it's making you even more dependent on externals for your happiness. And this is why, Buddhist meditation is really, I've studied all forms of meditation. I traveled around the world for many years studying with different religions, and I've practiced all sorts of different meditation techniques, all sorts of religions. And I think Buddhist meditation is the most difficult. My teacher, S.N. Goenka, kind of set the tone, and the world's following it right now, even monastics. But, meditate at least an hour at a time, not 15 minutes, not 20 minutes, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to change neural pathways. If you just meditate for 15 minutes at a time, it's good, it's better than nothing, but you're not really working to change your neural pathways. You're just relaxing yourself for 15 minutes. You're using just the induction technique of meditation. And then meditate at least 2 hours per day to change the neural pathways. And then take 10-day long courses or more, at least once a year for 10 years or more, and then learn how to meditate ceaselessly. So when you're meditating in that way, it's truly and there are studies that show that, long advanced meditators' brains look different physically. Neural pathways have been definitely changed. But it's the most difficult thing. I mean, you start off learning how to sit, cross-legged, and the pains from your legs affect you. You concentrate on something that the brain doesn't want to be concentrating on, the breath. It's boring, but boring just means that you still don't know how to truly appreciate the moment. And you keep thinking about the past, the present. The brain's not satisfied with the moment. The craving, anxiety, triggers, all types of things come up. But eventually, Buddhist meditation teaches you to slow down, to relieve stress, lower blood pressure, and you self-induce that biochemical state of relaxation that teaches you how to be happy with the moment, not suffer, and so on and so forth. So those are the claims, those are the things meditators experience. It'd be nice to see, what science thinks about that aspect of it. And eventually a dedicated meditator learns how to meditate all the time, just doing everyday stuff. And the brain learns to meditate all the time. So when something hits you that's really hard out of the blue, you're not expecting it, meditation kicks in and it rescues the brain from overwhelming feelings that would normally make you impotent to be able to react powerfully. But you still experience human feelings and emotions, and you're just able to deal with them better, as a good meditator. And So that's kind of how the rewiring of the brain works. So proper meditation is the opposite of navel gazing or indulging in pleasant daydreams or just laying about imagining things or repeating happy mantras. When you repeat happy mantras, you're programming those neural pathways in a self-directed way, but usually in a very external way, which causes attachment. So presumably in the long run, meditation lessens craving, rewires the brain to stop suffering unnecessarily. It reduces your anger, your hatred, your ill will, and reduces stress. And this is why it's so important to peer review test it scientifically in a laboratory. And we have done those types of experiments on health and on reducing stress, but never on trying to figure out if actual suffering can be abated. There is no hard evidence right now that the brain can actually be rewired not to suffer, or especially, well, and I'm not even going to say suffer, because maybe complete suffering is impossible, or complete non-suffering is impossible, but suffering unnecessarily. So what do I mean by that? So let's say someone hits you in the kneecap with a hammer. Obviously, you're going to feel pain. I mean, you'd be a robot with no nervous system if you didn't feel, unless you have a condition, if you didn't feel that pain, or if someone does something hurtful to you emotionally, to totally not react would be some sort of a sociopathic towards of approach to life, right? I don't think that that's what Buddhism means by non-suffering, unnecessary non-suffering. What I've noticed during meditation is meditators are taught to observe the sensations of what's happening without overreacting to them. Some of the worst things that we do in life to ourselves, where our worst enemy is when we overreact, and then we do even more harm to ourselves and others because something happened that we didn't like. And meditation teaches you how to step back, see what's happening, and react the way you really want to, rather than the way your sensations are going to force you to. So it's a way of gathering more control over the psyche. And this is very much a secular psychological aim. At the same time, it's, the question is it a good strategy? Does it work? I mean, it's testable, it's falsifiable, and this is what we're talking about here. The thing, the problem with Buddhist meditation is that it offers that hook. It offers that hook of, okay, meditation is going to teach you how not to suffer. But but there's a condition. You have to learn how to meditate properly. If you don't learn how to meditate properly, it's your fault if it doesn't work. So the big question is that hook just false altogether and it's impossible not to suffer unnecessarily? Or is that hook true? Is it legitimate, to say you need to learn how to meditate properly? I mean, after all, we've all probably heard about the idea that one needs to do something for 10,000 hours or more in order to really truly know how to do it well. I mean, we know that about singing, we know that about music, cooking, every skill. And why wouldn't it be true for meditation as well? So maybe Buddhism and secular Buddhism is being genuine and sincere when they say, look, you really have to learn how to meditate properly. Or maybe that's just a false hook that is not true, but we can test that in the lab. Buddhism does admit that very few people attain enlightenment, and there are people who are not going to be able to meditate. And the Buddha admitted that, there are conditions, mental conditions, physical conditions, and the Buddhists have pawned that off as bad karma, pilot error, and it's unfortunate. It's a stated problem. Just like, if you wanted to be able to run and jog and get the health benefits from jogging, you couldn't really blame jogging if you couldn't jog. If you were unable physically or mentally to jog, I think it might be unfair to say, well, jogging's bad because I can't do it. It might be bad to the person who can't do it, but some people can do it, and it's just the way it is. But Buddhism does make that disclaimer as well. The amount of time needed to learn meditation is also a disadvantage, because admittedly, according to Buddhism, it takes years and maybe lifetimes if you are a traditional Buddhist. Also, meditation is dangerous for some people. I don't recommend the meditation, and I'm talking about hardcore advanced meditation, not just 10-15 minutes, because not all people are psychologically ready to face the internals of what's going to happen when you open yourself up to the full psyche. I mean, there's a reason why we divert our attention from our psyche with drugs, sex, rock and roll. Sometimes we really can't handle what's going on. We're not ready for it. So I think if we listen to our bodies, listen to our medical practitioners, that's really, we should qualify before we go into heavy duty learning heavy duty meditation. But with a peer-reviewed study, these things will, I think, show themselves, and we can find out. So surprisingly, in 2,500 years, or maybe not surprisingly, because for the first 2,400 years or so, science didn't really exist and in its present form, and we didn't have peer-reviewed studies, and so what we want to do is we want to do this study. We want to widely publicize it, and for the sake of betterment of humanity. And I think it behooves us skeptics and Buddhists alike to seek out the truth and to test if Buddhism's claims are correct, and to scientifically evaluate the second largest religion in existence. Well, second largest if you believe that study, so maybe the fourth largest. So the Atheist Alliance of America, and that's atheistallianceamerica.org, and the Association of Mindfulness, Meditation, and Secular Buddhism, that's AMMSB.org, are conducting this peer-reviewed study soon. Please help us. Please donate. Please volunteer your time. Please get in touch with me. I think this study is really the first of its kind. It's a historic endeavor, and I'd really appreciate any help that you can offer in that regard. So that's the end of my presentation, and I'm open to looking forward to questions and to talking more about this.
Right. Mark, thank you so much for this. I was actually really shocked at how many differences and how nuanced secular Buddhism was. We have about 10 minutes. So how's this? Have you stop sharing your screen here in just a minute. I want to make sure everybody has time to write down the links. But how about this? In 10 minutes, how about I ask a barrage of questions, one after another, and if you give me real short, brief answers as best as you can. I know some of these are going to be a little bit more complex, but I want to try and get in as much as I can. Does that sound okay to you?
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Great. Okay. So the first thing is you're talking about Buddhism being the only religion that can be tested in real time. When you say is it testable, are you meaning is it falsifiable? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Okay. And you don't think that something like Christianity is falsifiable?
I think Christianity is a faith-based religion. I think it's falsifiable. I mean, well, I'll pose this question to you. How, Christianity claims that Jesus rose from the dead, right? Um, okay, that's an event that happened 2,000 years ago, roughly.
Sure.
How do we test that?
You find his body.
Well, okay, if you find his body,
yeah.
the Christians have spun the message to say, it wasn't really a physical
No, but
rebirth.
The act of finding his body falsifies the religion. So falsifiability doesn't just necessarily mean is it, does it lend towards proving it? It also lends towards disproving it. So there are
Christians longer than I have, I think. They're going to come up with that little,
right. But that is kind of one thing is that I do think that certain religions are in fact falsifiable. They may never be falsified. We may never ever find evidence of Jesus's body, but it's still theoretically possible. Secular Buddhism, is this mainly an American phenomenon, or is it actually practiced? Your version of secular Buddhism, is it practiced in Asia, in Indonesia, Southeast Asia, things like that?
Not traditionally, because it's a fairly new concept.
Okay.
Like in the last 20, 30 years. So it's gaining ground in other countries, but it's not something that's taught to kids generally in Asia.
How would you respond to criticism that says this is nothing but watered down Buddhism? You've completely perverted it and distorted it for an atheist agenda. How would you respond to something like that?
I think that's a great question, and I would flip that around and say that I think traditional Buddhism is a watered down version of Buddhism, because the Buddha wanted you to learn to meditate and to save and to rewire your brain so that you stop suffering. And what traditional Buddhism has done is added all these rites and rituals and gods and mixed it with Hinduism, and I think they've watered it down.
You think that they perverted it, which is the standard Theravada belief. Is that correct?
I think Theravada and Mahayana perverted Buddhism.
Oh, both. Okay.
Both, and I think they and I think this is a coming back to what Buddhism was supposed to be, kind of like Protestant Christianity. Christians might say about Catholicism.
Okay. That's interesting. I actually anticipated to hear that secular Buddhists were more in line with Theravada in the sense that they reject Mahayana's, scriptures and teachings and stuff like that, thinking that they pervert it. Okay. Is the goal of secular Buddhism, and or what you might think of it as maybe the original, actually, it's kind of interesting. It sounds like secular Buddhism is a restorationist movement. Is that a fair assessment?
True. Yes.
Okay. Is the goal of the meditation to end up viewing suffering as an illusion, or is it to build a tolerance for suffering so it's not as impactful? It lessens the suffering.
I think the latter, because the problem with seeing suffering as an illusion is that suffering hurts. So it's a dang good illusion if it's an illusion, right? And to just totally ignore that would be, would just be not to be connecting with reality as it is.
Okay. And is that what is being tested? Is that the promise that you're wanting to test?
Correct.
Okay. Help me, because part of a genuine scientific study that is trying to falsify something or show, test it, you would need to establish what would constitute ahead of time, what would constitute a falsification. Do you know the answer to that right now? What would in fact falsify that promise?
I don't. I mean, I'd be happy to kind of brainstorm, but it's not solid yet.
Okay. That would be just one major critique is make sure I want to see in writing what would constitute a false, what would constitute falsification when before the test comes back. And of course, the reason for that is obvious.
Absolutely.
If we don't know what falsifies it ahead of time, then oftentimes nothing ever does conveniently, right? Would you argue that when I hear you talk about it, it sounds a little bit like mysticism, but for atheists, like you have some kind of an esoteric knowledge. Is that a fair assessment, or do you not think it is mysticism for atheists?
Well, define what you mean by mysticism.
Generally, this idea that you are able to transcend the physical mind or rational mind. You obtain esoteric knowledge, usually through, in religious traditions, it's usually obtaining that knowledge through communion with the divine. But of course, no supernatural elements in atheist Buddhism. But it sounds still much like you are transcending the mind, transcending the physical world in order to reach this goal of tolerating suffering or minimizing it. Am I on the right path or not really?
That's a great point. So I think the terms mystical and everything that come with it are poetically describing a human condition. So we have this conscious element to our actualization, to our brain, right? We're that part of our brain where we do math and think rationally and stuff like that. And then we have that subconscious feeling part of our brain. And so when you meditate properly, you get access to those unconscious, what were unconscious or subconscious elements of the brain, and they come to light, and then you can process them intellectually. So that's a very dry way of saying, I'm gaining esoteric knowledge. What I'm gaining is information from a part of the brain that I would have never had access to if I didn't meditate properly.
Interesting.
But that's all it is. It's not very woolly and mystical. It's very, very dry like that.
Okay, so it's still grounded in physical properties like the brain.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Last question. Dr. Robert Price has kind of infamously called himself a Christian atheist. And this has gotten a lot of flack from both sides, of course, because seemingly they're contradictory terms. And I think, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but it sounds to me, if I understand kind of correctly, is part of it at least is, I follow the teachings of Jesus and I understand that part. And I follow some of those good ethical stuff, but I don't believe in all the hoopla, or I don't think that it was ever intended to become the kind of religion that it is today. But of course, the flack still remains. Calling yourself a Buddhist atheist or atheist Buddhist, are you running into the same problem that it is a contradiction in terms?
Sure. And that's a very legitimate yeah, because the question is the main difference, I think, though, is that the theist religions, when you take the God out of the theist religion, what do you have left? You have left rites and rituals and cultural things. And I think, I know lots of atheists who practice Jewish religion without the mysticism, without the supernaturalism. I know tons of atheists who have Christmas dinner and so on and so forth, and put a Christmas tree up and stuff like that. I don't see anything wrong with that, other than it does bolster those religions a little bit. But with Buddhism, it's a little bit different because, especially if a secular Buddhist is just meditating, then, they're actually transforming their brain, using Buddhist techniques, but there's no relationship there to anything supernatural or mystical. But, I think, it's somewhat similar. And I don't really see anything. I mean, I'm not going to say anything wrong with it, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing if someone wants to do that, because I think atheism shouldn't be dogmatic either. I think, with atheism, we've just come to the conclusion that, There's no evidence for these supernatural claims, and that's what makes us an atheist. If we like celebrating Christmas, that's a personal decision. I don't think atheists should be so dogmatic that we don't allow ourselves to be human.
Yeah. Interesting. Very good points. I really did enjoy it. I am fascinated by this, especially with the kind of the restorationist view of it. Yeah, I'm excited to see this explored more, fleshed out more, and I'm excited to see these research, this study conducted, and get the support. So, okay. I want to say thank you to everybody who did join us and for sticking it out. It's been a long 2 days, but it's been a great 2 days. We learned so much. So I want to thank everybody for showing up and supporting us and encouraging us. I want to thank all the presenters, and especially you, Mark. Thank you for sticking it out. And I really appreciate it. It means the world to us at GCRR to see so many great discussions and knowledge being shared across the globe. With that, Mark, I'll give you the last word.
Thank you so much, Darren. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here, and it was great to share with everyone on the call. And please contact me so we can do this study together.